The chandeliers of Thornbury Hall dripped candlelight over 50 guests arranged along the long mahogany table. Lady Eleanor Waverley, seated near the middle, wore pale dove-gray silk that made her dark hair gleam like polished walnut. Her gloves were immaculate, her posture exact, and her expression a flawless mask of tranquil courtesy, the kind of mask any gently bred lady learned to wear before her come out. She had been seated, by careful design, far enough from the Marquis of Thornbury to suggest no particular attachment. Engagement to a marquis, after all, did not mean advertisement of the fact. Alexander Ashworth had been adamant on that point. The announcement would come after his inheritance was secured. A minor delay, he had assured her, smiling that famous half-smile that melted reticence in a dozen drawing rooms. She had believed him. She had been a fool. Eleanor's fingers rested lightly on the stem of her wineglass, while Lady Brimley on her right chattered about the dampness of the autumn hunting season. The Marquis's voice carried from the head of the table, rich with port and self-satisfaction. He was speaking to Lord Henry Wrexham and Sir John Tilney, his most constant companions, and his words had grown careless as the meal drew to its close. "Never intend to clip my wings for a provincial miss with pretty eyes," Ashworth said, his tone pitched low but not low enough. "The engagement serves its purpose. Uncle's clause is satisfied. Once the funds are transferred, Eleanor may have her country manor and her needlework, and I shall have my liberty. She will learn soon enough that I do not keep to one pasture." Sir John snickered. Lord Henry, Eleanor noted through her fixed, pleasant expression, did not laugh. He glanced down the table, caught her gaze for an unguarded instant, and looked away. Eleanor's pulse did not quicken. Her cheeks did not warm. She had been trained by a mother who believed emotion displayed was power surrendered. Instead, she took a slow breath and reached for her napkin, heavy damask edged in silver thread. She drew it from her lap with deliberate care as though preparing to dab her lips, but instead of lifting it, she laid it upon the table. She folded it once, then twice, creating a crisp, exact square. The gesture was as final as a door closing. At that precise moment, Ashworth, seeking an audience for his wit, glanced her way. He offered a breezy smile and lifted his glass. "Miss Waverley, you look as though you are composing a sermon. Tell me, do you disapprove of a gentleman's honest conversation?" Several guests tittered. Eleanor met his eyes without flinching, and she smiled, a small, composed curve of her lips that reached no deeper than the candlelight allowed. It was not a smile of forgiveness or hurt. It was the smile of someone who had seen the sum of a man's character and found it remarkably light. "Not at all, my lord," she said. "A truly honest conversation is a treasure. One so seldom hears one." The tittering died. Ashworth's smile faltered, but vanity assured him he had heard a compliment. He turned back to his companions. Eleanor rose, excused herself with a murmur about a slight headache, and left the dining room with the measured grace of a woman walking away from a grave. She did not weep in the corridor. She did not allow her hands to shake until she reached her guest chamber where her maid, Sarah, was waiting. Then, and only then, she allowed herself 3 quiet, steadying breaths. "We leave before dawn," Eleanor said. "Pack only what can be carried in a single trunk. Leave the ball gowns, leave the jewels, especially the pearls." Sarah's eyes widened, but she asked no questions. She had served Eleanor for 6 years and recognized the quiet steel beneath the calm. Eleanor sat at the small writing desk and penned 3 lines. "Our arrangement is dissolved. I release you from all obligation and expect nothing in return. Do not follow." She did not sign it. She did not seal it with her family crest. She simply folded the paper, wrote Ashworth on the front, and left it propped against the looking-glass. At 5 o'clock, while the house still slept under a blanket of gray mist, Eleanor descended the servants' stair, passed through the empty kitchen garden, and climbed into a hired chaise. Sarah sat beside her, a single trunk strapped behind. The drive crunched under the wheels as the horses pulled away, and Thornbury Hall receded into the gloom. Alina folded her hands in her lap and watched the road ahead. She did not look back. Alexander Ashworth woke to weak morning light, and a knocking so persistent it pulled him from a dream in which Alina was walking through a doorway he could not reach. He sat up, irritated, and shouted for his valet. Instead, the door opened to admit his housekeeper, Mrs. Poole, whose face held the pinched expression of someone compelled to deliver ill news. "My lord, the young lady's chamber is empty. Her maid is gone. The bed has not been slept in." He stared at her, still thick with sleep. "What young lady?" "Lady Alina, my lord." He swung his legs from the bed and pulled on a dressing gown, his movements quick but not yet alarmed. Perhaps she had risen early to walk the grounds. Alina liked to walk, he recalled. She had mentioned a fondness for autumn mornings. He strode down the corridor to the blue guest chamber, pushed open the door, and stopped. The room was neat as a pin. The four-poster bed was untouched, the curtains drawn, and on the dressing table, propped against the glass, sat a folded paper. He crossed to it, read the 3 lines, and went very still. The silence in the room was absolute. Then he crumpled the note in his fist, strode to the bell pull, and summoned the entire household. Servants were questioned. The stable boy reported a hired chaise departing before dawn. The gatekeeper had seen nothing amiss because Lady Alina had left through the kitchen garden like a tradesman's delivery. By midday, Ashworth's uncle, Lord Cadogan, had arrived from his estate, his face purple with rage. "You imbecile! The inheritance clause required a public betrothal within the year and a marriage within 2. She is the granddaughter of an earl. She was perfect. What did you do?" Ashworth stood at the window of his study, staring at the empty drive. "I spoke carelessly. She overheard." "Overheard what?" "That I did not intend to keep faith with her, that she was a means to an end." Cadogan made a sound of disgust. "Then you deserve to lose her and every farthing. I will not bail you out of this." He left in a storm of carriage wheels. Ashworth remained motionless. He had never begged for anything in his life. Begging was for men without power. Yet the urge to ride after her, to demand an explanation, as if she owed him one, burned in his chest. He suppressed it. She had written "do not follow." Even in departure she had given him a command. Lord Henry Wrexham called that evening. He did not mince words. "I warned you that night. You were loud enough to be heard by the footman, and you did not care. She heard every word, Ashworth. I saw her face. She smiled at you as if you were a stranger she had just met and found rather tedious." Ashworth turned from the window. "I want her back." Henry shook his head. "You want what you cannot have. You have never loved anyone beyond your own convenience. Why would she believe otherwise?" "Because I will prove it," Ashworth said, though the words tasted hollow even to himself. Days passed. Alina's family, when informed, sent a curt letter from her father stating that Lady Alina had chosen to retire to the country for an indefinite period, and that no correspondence would be forwarded. The Marquis of Thornbury was, in all but formal decree, a rejected suitor. The tongue buzzed. Speculation painted Alina as either a jilted innocent or a cold-hearted minx. Ashworth knew which portrait was accurate, and it was neither. She was a woman who had heard enough, weighed it, and walked away without a scene. He began to understand, slowly and painfully, that the thing he had lost was not a strategic match. It was a woman who folded her napkin with more dignity than he possessed in his entire being. The cottage sat on a low cliff above the sea, its whitewashed walls streaked gray by salt wind. Alina rented it under the name Mrs. Waverley, her mother's maiden name, and told the village of Brixcombe that she was a widow of modest means seeking quiet. No one questioned. Widows were plentiful after years of war, and her dark, unadorned gowns fit the story. She rose early each day, made her own tea, and walked the shingle beach until her legs ached. In the afternoons, she taught reading and sums to a handful of children in the parish hall. Their fathers were fishermen. Their mothers were grateful for the instruction. Alina found a steady satisfaction in watching a boy's face light up as he puzzled out a sentence. It was not happiness, but it was purpose, and purpose was a sturdy handrail. Sarah stayed on as maid cook, and they managed with a frugality that felt cleansing. The Marquis's letters began arriving 3 weeks after her flight. The first she recognized by the heavy seal and the hand that had once written her stilted compliments. She held the letter over the kitchen fire until the edges curled black, then let it fall to ash. A second came, a third, she burned them all. Dr. John Everett entered her life on a Tuesday in October. He was the village physician, a man of 30 with sun-bleached hair and hands made gentle by years of stitching wounds and delivering bobbies. He came to the cottage to tend a feverish child Alina had taken in from the damp. When the child recovered, he returned to check on Alina herself, nodding the shadows beneath her eyes. "You have come from a place that exhausted you," he said, not prying, simply observing. "The sea will restore what it can. The rest requires time." She liked him for his directness. He did not simper or flatter. They walked along the cliff path and talked of medical texts, of the village's need for a proper school, of the migrating seabirds. His presence was restful, a fire banked low rather than ablaze. In London, autumn turned to winter. Ashworth attended Parliament, received guests, and moved through the rituals of his class with mechanical precision. Society noted his temper had shortened, his drinking had lessened, and he no longer laughed at cruel witticisms. Lady Portia Sedgwick, a handsome widow with ambitions, circled him at every event, offering sharp smiles and sharper innuendo. He did not respond. His mind was fixed on a gray-eyed woman who had folded a napkin and vanished. One night, alone in his library, he took out a sheet of paper and wrote a letter unlike any he had penned before. He did not demand her return. He did not protest his honor. He wrote, "I understand now why you left. I would have left too. I am trying to become a man who deserves the chance to explain himself. Until then, I will remain silent if that is what you wish. But I will wait." He sent it to her father's house, knowing it would be forwarded. This time in Devon, Alina read it. She stood by the window, the sea churning gray beyond the glass, and for a long while she did not move. She did not burn the letter. She folded it neatly and tucked it into the drawer of her writing desk. It was not forgiveness. It was a crack in the door she had locked. The Dowager Marchioness of Thornbury summoned her son in February. She was a woman of 60 winters, sharp-boned and clear-eyed, who had endured a loveless marriage and raised her son alone after his father's death. She received Alexander in her sitting room, where a single fire cast long shadows. "You have made a ruin of the one sensible choice you ever made," she said without preamble. "Lady Alina is not a trinket you can misplace and retrieve when convenient. She is a woman of substance. You humiliated her and dismissed her worth in a room full of people. Why would she return?" Alexander sat forward, elbows on his knees. "I was a fool." "You are still a fool, but you may become less of one. Where is she?" He told her. The dowager nodded slowly. "Devon, her mother's family had a cottage there. Clever girl. Go to her then. Not with grand gestures. Alina will despise a parade. Go with patience. Do not demand. Do not perform. Offer something real." He left the next morning. The journey took 2 days over winter roads. He arrived in Brixcombe as a cold drizzle began to fall, his greatcoat spattered with mud. The innkeeper directed him to the cottage on the cliff, and he walked the last mile on foot, the salt wind cutting his face. The village was holding a small fair in the square. Lanterns swung from poles and the smell of roasting chestnuts filled the air. He saw her before she saw him. Alina, in a plain blue cloak, laughing at a toss game while Dr. Everett stood at her shoulder, smiling down at her. The physician's hand rested briefly on her arm, a touch of easy familiarity. Ashworth's chest constricted. He had known, in some abstract way, that a woman of her quality would not remain unnoticed, but seeing it was an acid he had not prepared for. He stepped forward, and the crowd parted enough for Alina to catch sight of him. Her laughter faded. Her face grew still but not hostile. She inclined her head in a polite, distant greeting as if he were a passing acquaintance. "Lord Thornbury, You are a long way from London. I came to speak with you, privately if you will permit it." Dr. Everett looked between them, reading the tension, and quietly excused himself with a promise to call on Eleanor later. Eleanor waited until he was out of earshot, then said, "You have traveled far, my lord, but distance does not erase words." "I know. I am not here to erase anything. I am here to ask if you will allow me to show you something other than the man who spoke that night." Eleanor studied him. The rain grew heavier, beating on his hair. She did not invite him to the cottage. "You may remain in the village if you choose. I cannot prevent you, but I am not the woman who left Thornbury Hall. That woman would have accepted any apology to keep the peace. I no longer require peace at such a price." She drew her cloak closer. "If you wish to speak, you will earn the right. Good evening, my lord." She walked away into the rain, and he let her go. He took a room at the inn that night, a damp, cramped chamber, and lay awake listening to the sea. He had never earned anything in his life. He was not certain he knew how, but the memory of her smile at that dinner table, a smile that had seen him clearly and found him wanting, drove him out of bed before dawn. The days that followed were quiet and deliberate. Ashworth did not approach Eleanor again for a full week. Instead, he spoke to the village rector, a weathered man with a bad roof on the parish hall. Within 3 days, materials arrived, and a crew of laborers, paid from Ashworth's purse, began repairs. He asked no acknowledgement. He stood in the mud alongside the workmen, his fine hands blistering. When a fisherman's wife grew ill and Dr. Everett needed funds for a specialist in Exeter, Ashworth provided them anonymously. He walked the cliff path each morning at dawn, and Eleanor, watching from her window, saw him pass without once glancing toward the cottage. She was not moved by the gestures themselves. She had learned to distrust grand shows of reformation. But the anonymity gave her pause. He sought no credit. The villagers, unaware of his title, called him Mr. Ash and invited him to share their ale. He did, listening to their stories, and he did not talk of himself. One Sunday after service, he waited by the Lychgate. Eleanor emerged, a prayer book in hand, and this time she did not look past him. She stopped. "You have been busy, my lord." "I have been learning," he said. His voice was rougher than she remembered, the polish stripped away. "I have no prepared speech. I will give you only the truth. That night I spoke words that were unforgivable. I placed my vanity and my amusement above your dignity. I offered you a sham betrothal and expected gratitude. You were right to leave. I am not here to ask you to return to that life. I am here because I cannot make myself whole without telling you that I know what I destroyed." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she held her composure. "You destroyed my trust, my lord. I entered that arrangement with hope, however guarded. You made it a joke for your friends. What am I to do with this new version of you? How do I trust that he is real?" "You don't," he said simply. "You watch, you wait, you decide. I ask for nothing except the chance to be within your orbit. If in time you wish me to leave, I will." She looked at him for a long moment. The winter light sharpened the lines around his eyes. He seemed older, tired, and stripped of the arrogance that had once draped him like a cape. She saw, beneath it, the bones of a man who might be capable of change, not for reward, but because he had been forced to meet himself. "You may call at the cottage on Thursday afternoons," she said at last. "For tea, half an hour. We will speak of impersonal things. Do not press for more." "Thank you." The words were so quiet they were almost swallowed by the wind. She walked away, and he stood at the gate for a full minute before turning toward the inn. Dr. Everett, who had observed the exchange from the church porch, caught up to Eleanor on the lane. He was too perceptive not to see the slight tremble in her hand. "You care for him still," he said gently, "or you would not grant him an inch." "I care for the truth," Eleanor replied. "I am trying to discover what that is." Everett sighed, a sad smile creasing his eyes. "I will not stand in your way. You deserve a man who knows your value. If he has learned that, I am man enough to wish you well." He pressed her hand and turned toward the village. leaving Alina alone with the sound of the sea and the strange, fragile beginning of something she could not yet name. Spring arrived with a fragile warmth, and with it came Lady Portia Sedgwick. She descended upon the village in a coach of glossy black, a widow in magenta silk who claimed to be visiting a distant cousin. Her real quarry was the Marquis of Thornbury, whose absence from London had stretched into months. She had schemed too long to lose him to rustic obscurity. Portia took rooms at the inn and wasted no time. She invited Ashworth to dine with her in the private parlor, her manner both confiding and sharp. When he refused, citing other obligations, she laughed and said loudly enough for the innkeeper to hear, "You chase a woman who humiliated you." She heard what she heard, of course, but it was never meant for her ears. "A bit of theater, my dear. Men always boast when they drink." The footman who positioned her perfectly was well paid, though I shan't say by whom. She had intended the remark as a barb to wound Ashworth and send him back to London, weary of the chase. But the innkeeper's wife, who had grown fond of Alina, carried the tale straight to the cottage. Alina listened in the kitchen, her hands stilling on the dough she was kneading. The room felt suddenly airless. The footman had been paid. Lady Portia had arranged the entire scene, the seating, the goading, the open door that allowed a certain overheard conversation to carry. Ashworth had been a drunken fool, yes, but he had been a fool in a trap laid for him. She washed her hands, dried them, and walked to the inn alone. Portia was taking tea in the parlor when Alina entered. The widow's eyebrows rose, but her smile remained poised. "Lady Alina, what a delightful surprise! I had heard you were living like a nun." "I came to thank you," Alina said calmly. She did not sit. "Your servant was overheard in the village. I understand now. You engineered that evening at Thornbury Hall. You paid a footman to ensure I heard my betrothed's words. You meant to drive me away." Portia's smile faltered only slightly. "And if I did, you left readily enough. Perhaps a part of you wished to go. Lord Thornbury was never truly yours, my dear. A man like that belongs to his own appetites." Alina stepped closer, her voice low and even. "You are wrong. He belongs, as all men do, to his choices, and you belong to your malice. I shall not trouble you further. Enjoy your tea." She turned and left, leaving Portia's smug expression cracking into something far less certain. That evening, Alina sent a message asking Ashworth to call. He arrived within the hour, anxiety clear in the set of his shoulders. She told him, without preamble, what she had learned. His face drained of color. "I did not know," he said hoarsely. "I swear to you I did not contrive." "I believe you," she interrupted, her voice softer now. "But you still chose to speak those words. Portia's scheme required your willingness to perform. You gave her the ammunition." He could not deny it. He stood before her, a marquis in a rough coat, and lowered his head. "I did. I was a hollow man, eager to impress hollow men. I have no defense." Alina watched him, her heart aching despite her resolve. "I need a day to think, Alexander. One day. Do you trust me enough to give me that?" He lifted his gaze. "I trust you with everything." She nodded once, "Then go." He left, and Alina sat alone as dusk claimed the cottage. She thought of the letter he had sent, the repairs done in secret, the Thursdays spent discussing nothing more significant than tides. She thought of the man she had first accepted, a stranger in lordly armor, and the man who now stood before her, unarmored and asking for nothing. The decision, she realized, had already been made, but she would not rush to deliver it. He had waited months. He could wait one more day, 3 days later, for she had taken 2 extra to settle her thoughts. Alina returned to Thornbury Hall. She had sent no advance word. The chaise rolled up the long drive in the late afternoon, and she descended alone, leaving Sarah with the driver. The great house loomed, stone and ivy, and it felt less like an adversary than a place that had simply waited. A footman recognized her and gaped before hurrying to open the door. She was admitted without question. The housekeeper, Mrs. Poole, stammered that his lordship was in the garden, and Alina walked through the silent corridors, past the dining room where she had once folded a napkin and closed a chapter. She found Alexander in the rose garden, standing before a barren trellis, his back to the house. He did not hear her approach until her shoes crunched on the gravel. He turned, and the expression that crossed his face was not relief or triumph. It was a raw, unpolished hope that made him look younger and far more human. "Eleanor." She stopped a few feet from him. "I have made my decision." He waited, hands at his sides, not reaching for her. "I will marry you," she said, "but on conditions. The marriage will be announced properly in St. George, with no hidden clauses or private arrangements. You will never again speak of me or to me with the carelessness you displayed that night. I will not be a convenience. I will be your partner, or I will be nothing." "Agreed," he said, the word almost breaking. "There is more. We will reside part of each year in Devon. I will continue my work with the village school. You will support it not from a distance but with your presence. And if you ever repeat the performance of that dinner, if you ever make me a joke for your friends, I will leave again. And this time I will not write a note." He took a step forward, then stopped himself. "All of it, every word, I swear it." She held his gaze. "Then I will stay." What passed between them was not a passionate embrace. He did not sweep her into his arms. He simply extended his hand, and she placed hers within it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, and they stood together in the fading light as if sealing a quiet, binding thing. Later, when the household had been informed and Mrs. Poole was weeping with joy and ordering a special supper, Eleanor sat in the small morning room off the terrace. Alexander joined her, and tea was brought on a silver tray. She lifted her napkin from the table, unfolded it, and laid it across her lap with deliberate ease. Then, noticing the smallest flaw in his cravat, a fold gone awry in his haste, she smiled, reached across, and straightened it. He caught her wrist gently. "You are smiling at my mistake again." "I am," she said, "but this time I am staying to see you correct it." He pressed his lips to the back of her gloved hand, and it was not a grand gesture but a vow. When the servants came to clear the tea things later, they found the Marquis and his future Marchioness sitting in comfortable silence, watching the garden awaken to spring. The napkin lay folded on the table, but Eleanor was still there, and that was the only ending that mattered.